To this training on the basics of the Sexual Assault Service Program funding. This session aims to provide an overview of key objectives, including the purpose of SASP funding, UOVC's funding plan, and understanding eligibility criteria and navigating application specifics. Additionally, we will review allowable and unallowable costs, award requirements, and highlight helpful resources to support your program. Throughout this presentation, we will reference the companion guide and funding instructions. These resources, along with the information provided in this presentation, are designed to guide you through the application process and support you throughout the life cycle of your award if funding is granted. SASP was created under the Violence Against Women Act and Department of Justice Reauthorization Act of 2005. It is the first federally funded program solely dedicated to the direct intervention of sexual assault victims. Additionally, the federal entity Office on Violence Against Women provides funding directly to state coalitions to support sexual assault service programs throughout SASP funding. The purpose of SASP funding is to support the establishment, maintenance, and expansion of rape crisis centers and to provide direct assistance to individuals victimized by sexual assault, regardless of their age. These funds are designed to ensure that survivors have access to critical services such as advocacy, counseling, and crisis intervention, which are essential to their recovery and empowerment. SASP has 6 key purpose areas: hotline services, accompaniment and advocacy, crisis intervention and support, information and referral, culturally specific services, and educational materials. Be sure to review the full definition of these purpose areas in your SASP companion guide. Additionally, these funds must be used to provide intervention and related assistance in the following ways. First, to adult, youth, and child victims of sexual assault, ensuring survivors of all ages receive the support they need. Second, to family and household members of these victims, recognizing the broader impact of sexual violence on loved ones. And third, to those who are collaterally affected by the victimization, though it is important to note that this does not include the perpetrator of the crime. To ensure your program qualifies for SASP funding, let's review the specific eligibility requirements under the SASP program. Programs must fall in one of 3 categories. Rape crisis centers focused on providing direct support to individuals impacted by sexual assault. Rape crisis centers seeking funding must be designated by the state and actively working toward meeting the 5 standards of care. Culturally specific nonprofit organizations offering services tailored to sexual assault survivors, and tribal programs and projects dedicated to assisting those who have experienced sexual assault. All eligible programs must be designed to provide services specifically for sexual assault survivors. It is not recommended to request SASP funding for a portion of a position's hours unless there is a clearly designated and distinct program for sexual assault services. This ensures that SASP funding is used to provide comprehensive, survivor-centered care and maximize its impact for those it's intended to support. The state of Utah will subaward up to $1.5 million over 2 years, or $750,000 per year, to eligible agencies through SASP funding. These funds are specifically intended to address unmet needs in communities and support impactful programs for sexual assault survivors. When preparing your application, it is essential to identify the unmet needs in your community and present a clear, comprehensive program plan that effectively addresses those needs. Proposals must align with UOVC priorities and focus on one or more of the 6 federal SASP program areas. This ensures that funding is directed toward initiatives with the greatest potential for impact and helps close critical gaps in services for survivors. We anticipate making approximately 13 to 15 awards during this funding cycle. We're going to cover the SASP priorities next. First up
are the standards of care. The Utah Coalition of Sexual Assault, UCASA, developed 5 key standards of care for rape crisis centers in order to ensure that every sexual assault survivor in the state of Utah has access to a minimum level of consistent services. Rape crisis centers that are seeking funding with UOVC should meet or have a plan to meet the 5 standards at the level established by their definitions. You can click on the green standards of care on this slide to go to the full overview of the standards of care, or you can find the standards of care in your application instructions. UCASA will work with a program to assist in the development of unmet standards. Next, we have the Rape Crisis Center recommendations. A rape crisis center striving to adhere to best practice models would focus on these key areas to ensure comprehensive support and services for survivors of sexual assault, sexual violence. These practices were developed in collaboration with local and national experts in the field of sexual violence victim services and align closely with the recommendations from the nationally recognized Sexual Assault Demonstration Initiative, SADI, study. For culturally specific programs, it's recommended to strive for best practices as outlined in the SASP Companion Guide. These organizations should be run by and for the communities they serve, with staff members who are part of those communities. Strong support for sexual assault services includes operating with clear policies and ensuring services are visible in agency publications, websites, brochures, and events. Programs should provide ongoing training for staff on trauma-informed and anti-oppression approaches. Services must be culturally relevant, actively engage underserved populations, and address the diverse needs of survivors while combating racism and oppression. Regular evaluations, including assessments and satisfaction surveys, are essential to improving the program and ensuring the well-being of staff and the organization. Now we will move to the SASP application. Since SASP is a federal award, it is imperative that you watch the Federal Awards application video found at UOVC YouTube Resource Library, as it will cover the applicant section, the application info section, and the budget in general for all federal applications. The application info section is a heavily scored area in the review process, so using all available resources is beneficial. For our purposes now, we will focus on specifics related to the SASP application process. For returning applicants, you will notice an immediate change to the initial application page. The blue SASP info tab on the application has been removed. UOVC is committed to streamlining and improving the application process, and you will see changes that were intended to reduce the administrative burden related to the application and management of grants. Moving on to required files section of the application. In the required files tab, you will upload all necessary documents to complete your application. Files marked with a red asterisk are required for all applicants, while others are required only if they apply to your agency or funding request. This year, we are introducing a new option to simplify this process. Documents that don't frequently change between funding cycles, such as your agency's 501c3 status, W-9, roster of governing board, and organizational chart, can now be uploaded directly to your agency's profile instead of each individual application. To do this, click the account information icon on the top right corner and navigate to the Related tab and upload these files. Complete the pre-screen questionnaire to assist in determining your agency's eligibility. If any question is answered with no, provide a clear justification. For the SAM verification, you will upload a PDF of your active SAM account status, which is available through your sam.gov account. You will provide job descriptions for all employees or volunteers that you have requested to be funded by the grant, detailing responsibilities and qualifications. Agency budget tracking form is new this cycle. You should include data from the most recent fiscal year, listing the total dollar amount received by source, federal, state, private, or donations. Use the narrative section to describe your agency's efforts to increase or diversify funding. Organization chart should clearly represent your agency's structure from EDs or CEOs to department heads, staff, and volunteers. Ensure all positions funded by the grant are included and clearly identified. In the past, completing a program plan was required. This year, we have a new process. The SASP required questions will replace the previous program, plan, goals, and objectives section. This change ensures that semi-annual progress reports aligns with and reports the same metrics as the annual report. The required questions form, along with your narrative responses regarding your budget and program plan, should provide a clear understanding of how your agency intends to utilize SASP funds over the 2-year award cycle and the outcomes you aim to achieve. The required questions form can be found on the UOVC website on the grant solicitation page. When selecting the statutory purpose areas, you're welcome to check all purpose areas that will be supported with SASP funds. Only select the purpose areas SASP funds will support, not all that your organization is able to provide. The next section asks if you will be using SASP funds to create or significantly update any products such as brochures, presentation, or web-based publications in the next year. If yes, please note that all materials and publications require a publication disclaimer be included. When entering data into the Victim Services section of the required question form, remember that you are reporting only on the SASP-funded services that will be provided to the primary and secondary victims, and that the numbers are a projection for a full year. When providing your response in the intended outcomes section, include a brief explanation of your intended outcomes and demonstrate how these funds will support victims of sexual assault. The letter of coordination will provide details on collaboration with partner agencies, including the frequency of meetings, roles of participants, and signatures from all partners certifying their involvement. New this year is the record of providing effective services requirement. This is an opportunity to demonstrate that your program provides effective services. For returning agencies, you will simply upload progress reports from the past year to meet this requirement. For new agencies, we ask that you include examples such as the number of clients served, service delivery metrics, program evaluations, stakeholder surveys, or outcomes that show improvement in client well-being or access to resources. Nonprofit applicants are required to upload their most updated 501c3 status. current roster of your agency's governing board is required for nonprofit organizations. The roster should include full names, titles, and contact information. UOVC strongly encourages agencies to maintain best practices by ensuring the executive director does not serve as the board president. Separating these roles is important for preserving effective internal controls. I will touch on the next three required files, but want to stress that you only need to submit policies if you are requesting funds in the category. I'm sorry, I'm pausing because I'm not seeing the slide. We'll touch on the next three required files, but want to stress that you only need to submit policies if you are requesting funds in the category. I also recommend that you review the companion guide for additional information. First, the agency travel policy should outline the procedures, guidelines, and any restrictions related to travel, including how travel expenses are managed, approved, and reimbursed. Keep in mind that Utah has moved to the following GSA rates. Second, the emergency funds or direct aid policy should ensure funds are distributed fairly, transparently, include internal controls, and are in alignment with program goals. The rental deposit policy should be clear, actionable, and align with agencies' financial management practices. As a note, these costs cannot be utilized until this policy is approved by UOVC. The last two required files are related to office space costs and contracts and are only necessary if you are requesting funds in those categories. When requesting funds for office space expenses, documentation supporting the fair market value of the space and supporting documentation such as comparable rental rates, appraisals, lease agreements, or letters from real estate professionals are required. If your funding request includes contracted services, rental agreements, or similar arrangements, you must include the relevant contracts in your application. If a contract is not finalized, it must be submitted later in the award year before funds are spent. A final note regarding all required files. Carefully review all responses and attachments to ensure accuracy and completeness. These responses and documents are critical for demonstrating your agency's compliance with funding requirements.
Now we will discuss the allowable costs under the SASP program and how these funds can be used to support a variety of services for survivors of sexual assault. When considering allowable costs under SASP, it is essential to focus on expenses that directly support intervention and assistance for victims. Funding can be used for various associated costs with the 6 purpose areas. For 24-hour hotline services, this includes staffing, equipment, and technology to provide immediate crisis support. Accompaniment and advocacy costs may cover staff time, travel expenses, and training for advocates assisting victims at hospitals, law enforcement agencies, or court proceedings. Crisis intervention and support services can include salaries for counselors, support space for support groups, and resources for short-term individual or group counseling sessions. For information and referral services, allowable costs might involve outreach materials, brochures, and staff time dedicated to connecting victims and their families with needed resources. Culturally specific services may include outreach to underserved communities, hiring bilingual or culturally informed staff, and developing tailored materials. Additionally, funds can be used to create and distribute information materials related to these services. By aligning expenditures with these categories, SASP funds are effectively utilized to provide direct, meaningful support to victims. SASP funds can also support volunteer-related expenses directly related to the SASP project. This includes costs for the training and supervision of volunteers who are assisting with sexual assault services. This year, thanks to the dedication of many advocate voices, SASP now allows for direct payments to victims, their family members, or household members, as long as the payments are related to the sexual assault. For example, these funds can be used for emergency food, transportation, emergency housing, obtaining vital documents, or other costs related to the victimization. Gift cards may also be provided to clients, but only if used for allowable costs under SASP guidelines. Programs must have strong policies in place to oversee the use of gift cards following UOVC guidelines. Accessibility is a key priority under SASP funding, and applicants are encouraged to allocate funds to ensure that individuals with disabilities, deaf individuals, and those with limited English proficiency have full access to services. This can include funding for American Sign Language interpreters, language interpretation, translation services, and the purchase of adaptive equipment to ensure equitable access for all survivors. It is also important to understand the limitations on how these funds can be used. I will now outline some unallowable costs to ensure clarity and compliance. SASP funds cannot be used for educational programs or training for allied professionals or the general public. Similarly, prevention efforts like bystander intervention, social norms campaigns, or healthy relationship presentations are not permitted. Funds may not be allocated for lobbying efforts or research projects, nor can they be used for physical modifications to buildings, such as renovations, painting, or replacing windows or doors. Sexual assault forensic examiner projects and criminal justice related projects, including those involving law enforcement, prosecution, courts, or forensic interviews, are not allowed expenses under this grant. While sexual assault response teams are critical to our work, SASP funding can only support an advocate's attendance if it falls within their funded role. SASP funds cannot support domestic violence services unrelated to sexual assault, nor can they be used for food or beverages, except in emergency situations to assist victims. Finally, fundraising activities such as financial campaigns, endowment drives, or gift solicitations are strictly prohibited. If you are a returning applicant, you will notice some changes to the award requirements. These updates are shared to ensure you fully understand what will be required if your program receives funding. To streamline processes, progress reporting will now occur semi-annually. These reports have been redesigned to align with the information needed for the SASP annual report. Reports are due twice a year, January 30th, covering the first half of the year, and July 30th, covering the second half. The annual report is also due on January 30th alongside the first progress report. The annual report, which is required federally from the Office of Violence Against Women, collects data on a calendar year, January to December. Programs may choose to collect data more frequently to maintain quality. This is a reimbursement-based award. You must submit reimbursement or payment requests at least quarterly to UOVC for approved SASP expenses incurred during the billing cycle. These requests are due 30 days after the billing cycle ends. Each program is required to update its governing board twice a year on the award's status and progress toward intended outcomes. Best practices suggest presenting these updates during the first or second quarter and again at the end of the awards cycle. On this resource slide and in your instruction packet, you will find resources to help with grant application and management, as well as resources that provide sexual assault specific information and support for your programs. We encourage you to use these resources to strengthen and enhance your application and to help further develop your programs after the RFP process. Thank you for reviewing these SASP application instructions. We encourage all applicants to carefully consider the eligibility requirements, funding priorities, and allowable costs to ensure your proposal aligns with our mission to support and serve sexual assault victims. By addressing the unique needs of survivors and prioritizing trauma-informed care, we can make a meaningful impact in healing and empowering those affected by sexual assault. Please don't hesitate to reach out using the public Q&A form if you have questions. We're here to support you in submitting a strong proposal. We look forward to partnering with you and best of luck with your applications.